How far would you travel on a promise? In 1961, the moon sat 384,000 kilometers away, about 239,000 miles, and no human had left low Earth orbit. Within 8 years, 12 people would walk on it. On the 25th of May 1961, President Kennedy committed the United States to landing a man on the moon and returning him safely before the decade was out. At that moment, America had logged just 15 minutes of human spaceflight. The Saturn V rocket stood 111 meters tall, about 363 feet, taller than a 30-story building. At launch, it weighed nearly 3,000 tons, and its 5 engines burned 20 tons of fuel every second. On the 27th of January 1967, a fire swept the Apollo 1 capsule during a ground test, killing Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee in seconds. The program stopped, redesigned the spacecraft, and went on. The cost was never hidden. On the 24th of December 1968, Apollo 8 became the first crewed ship to orbit the moon. As they came around the far side, William Anders photographed the Earth rising over the gray lunar limb. It is still one of the most reproduced images ever made. Until Apollo 8, no human eye had seen the far side of the moon directly. The crews found it utterly unlike the near side we know, with almost no dark plains, just a battered, ancient crust saturated with craters going back 4 billion years. At 9:32 in the morning on the 16th of July 1969, Apollo 11 left the pad at Cape Kennedy. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins rode a column of flame that almost 1 million people had come to watch in person along the Florida coast. During the descent, the guidance computer flashed alarms, 1201 and 1202, as it overloaded. Mission Control made the call to keep going. Armstrong, seeing a boulder field below, took manual control with seconds of fuel remaining. At 20 minutes past 8 in the evening, Greenwich time, on the 20th of July 1969, the lunar module Eagle settled onto the Sea of Tranquillity. Armstrong radioed that the Eagle had landed. In Houston, a room full of engineers finally breathed. 6 hours later, Neil Armstrong climbed down the ladder and pressed his boot into the lunar dust. His words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," reached an estimated 600 million people listening on Earth. Buzz Aldrin followed, and looking around the airless gray plain, he called it magnificent desolation. The photograph Armstrong took of him, the whole scene curved in his gold visor, became the defining image of the entire age. While Armstrong and Aldrin worked below, Michael Collins orbited alone overhead. Each time he passed behind the moon, radio contact cut out completely. For about 48 minutes on every orbit, he was more isolated than any person in history. Bolted to the leg of the lunar module, left behind on the Sea of Tranquillity, is a steel plaque. It reads that here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, and that they came in peace for all mankind. There is no wind on the moon and no rain to wash anything away. The bootprints Armstrong and Aldrin pressed into the soil that day are still there now, perfectly sharp-edged, and on current estimates they will survive for millions of years. In November 1969, Apollo 12 proved the landing could be precise. Pete Conrad and Alan Bean set down just 200 meters, about 650 feet, from the Surveyor 3 probe that had waited on the surface for 2 years. On the 13th of April 1970, an oxygen tank exploded aboard Apollo 13, 200,000 miles from home. Jim Lovell's crew used the lunar module as a lifeboat, and against the odds, NASA brought all 3 men back alive. In February 1971, Apollo 14's Alan Shepard, the first American in space a decade earlier, smuggled a golf club head to the moon. In 1/6 gravity, he hit a ball that he swore sailed for miles. In July 1971, Apollo 15 carried the first lunar roving vehicle. David Scott and James Irwin drove it across the foot of the Apennine Mountains, no longer explorers on foot, but the first people to drive on another world. Standing on the airless surface, David Scott dropped a falcon feather and a hammer together. They struck the ground at the same instant, exactly as Galileo had predicted 350 years earlier. Physics does not care what we find comfortable. The rover let crews range far from the lander. Across the last 3 missions, astronauts drove more than 90 kilometers in total, about 56 miles, reaching sites no walking explorer could ever have touched. In April 1972, Apollo 16's John Young and Charles Duke explored the Descartes highlands, a rugged, bright terrain. They gathered nearly 100 kilograms of rock, over 200 pounds, from a landscape unlike any visited before. In December 1972, Apollo 17 carried Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt, the only trained geologists to reach the moon. They stayed 3 days and drove the rover past towering boulders in the Taurus-Littrow Valley. On the way out, the crew of Apollo 17 photographed the whole Earth, fully lit, hanging alone in black space. Known as the Blue Marble, it showed humanity for the first time a complete, fragile world with no borders drawn on it. As Eugene Cernan climbed the ladder for the last time, he spoke of leaving as they had come, with peace and hope for all mankind. No human being has stood on the moon since that December day. Across 6 landings, the Apollo crews returned with 382 kilograms of lunar rock and soil, about 842 pounds. Much of it remained sealed and unopened, kept for instruments not yet invented. Those rocks rewrote the moon's history. Their chemistry matches Earth's mantle, the strongest evidence that the moon formed when a Mars-sized world struck the young Earth and flung a ring of molten debris into orbit. The astronauts left mirrors on the surface. Every night, observatories fire lasers at them and time the echo, measuring the Earth-Moon distance to within a few centimeters and watching the moon drift away from us by about 4 centimeters a year. The crews left seismometers behind, and they kept listening for years. When spent rocket stages were crashed into the surface, the whole moon rang and shook for nearly an hour, a sign of how dry and rigid its interior truly is. No one person built Apollo. At its peak, the program employed around 400,000 people, and the guidance computer that flew it ran at just over 40,000 cycles a second, far slower than the phone in your pocket. The Apollo guidance computer held about 4 kilobytes of memory and weighed 30 kilograms, some 70 pounds. It steered 3 men 250,000 miles and back with less power than a modern greetings card that plays a tune. At its height, Apollo consumed more than 4% of the entire United States federal budget. When the political race was won, the money fell away, and 3 planned missions, Apollo 18, 19, and 20, were canceled. The view back changed us as much as the moon did. The Earthrise and Blue Marble photographs helped launch the modern environmental movement, the first Earth Day following within months. We had gone to another world and rediscovered our own. The 6 flags planted by the crews are almost certainly still standing, but 5 decades of unfiltered sunlight have bleached their colors away. They are blank white banners now, marking where we once dared to go. Now we are returning. NASA's Artemis program aims to land crews near the moon's south pole, where shadowed craters hold billions of tons of water ice, this time to stay rather than to visit. So the next time the moon rises, look at it and hold this in your head, even though the numbers are hard to hold. 12 human beings once stood on that gray surface, looked back, and saw the whole of us at once.